Well, all my life, I have been very, very interested in trying to develop character qualities. And I've learned that some of the best lessons that I learned to help me develop my character qualities, I learned when I was just a child. Now, of course, no, one of the main character qualities that all children and adults need is the character quality of obedience. And I want to tell you how I learned about obedience. When I was just a little boy, about 6 years old, my brother Donald was 3, almost 4. We lived out in the country in Bolivar, Tennessee, and next door to us there was the Sisco family. Now, Buddy Sisco was their 15-year-old son, and he was mean. As a matter of fact, our daddy told us, boys, don't you ever go over to Buddy Sisco's house because Buddy is mean and he might just hurt you boys. So we said, yes, sir, okay. And so we were out in the yard one day playing, and all of a sudden we looked over and Buddy Sisco came out in his yard. It was just maybe 50 yards from our house, and he said, hey, boys, and he waved, and of course, being a friendly kind of guy like I was, I said, hey, and my brother said, oh, Nicky, that's Buddy Sisco. You're not supposed to say hey to him. And I said, oh, it doesn't hurt to just be friendly. And he said, well, you're my big brother, so if you say it's okay, I guess it is. And so he said, hey. And then Buddy Sisco, after a few minutes, said, hey, boys, come over here. I got a surprise I want to show you. Oh, man, I wish he hadn't have said surprise, because I just love surprises. And so I said, what is it? He said, oh, you'll have to see it. It's really, really neat. And I said to my brother, hey, let's go over and see Buddy Sisco's surprise. Well, Donald said, oh, no, we can't go over to Buddy Sisco's house. Daddy said, don't go to Buddy Sisco's house. So I thought for a minute. I said, well, you know what? We won't go to his house. We'll just go to his yard. And Donald said, well, I think that Daddy meant not to go over there at all. But he said, but you're my big brother, so if you say it's okay, I guess it's okay. So we went over to Buddy Sisco's yard, and I said, what's the surprise? He said, well, come around back. It's in the well house. Now, a well house was just a block building that had an electric pump in there that pumped water out of the ground, pumped it into the house. And it didn't have any windows or any lights. It was just a little dark well house. So he went around and he opened the door to the well house. He said, look in there. Look at that. So I looked in. I said, well, I don't see anything. I did see one thing. There was a big spider's web right across the door, but that wasn't what he was talking about. And so I said, I don't see anything. He said, well, you've got to get a little closer. And so I inched up a little bit, and he said, no, you got to get closer. So he went around behind us, and he put his right hand on my back, put his left hand on Donald's back, and he began to push us just a little bit. He said, you got to get a little closer, got a little closer. My face was getting closer and closer to that spider's web, and he said, get a little closer. Just a little bit closer. Oh, he pushed us, and man, we went into that well house. And there I was standing. Of course, I was barefooted, and Donald was barefooted too. And we were standing in water, and were there in the dark. And we turned around and said, "What?" And by about that time, he closed the door to the well house. We could hear him just laughing, and we started screaming, "Help! Help!" And he went on in his house and closed his door. And there we were, two little boys locked up in a well house where there were spiders and maybe snakes and electric wires. And we were scared. And so we did what just about any little boy would do. We began to scream our heads off. Help! 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 And just about that time, our daddy drove up in the driveway of our house. And he got out of his car and started in the house. And he heard these little voices off in the distance, help, help. And he stopped and he said, that sounds like Nicky and Donald. He said, nah, that couldn't be them. That's coming from over at Buddy Sisco's house. And I know they wouldn't be at Buddy Sisco's house because I told them not to ever go over there. So he started on in the house, but then he heard it again. Help, help, help. And he said, well, that's my boys. And so he began to call us, Nicky, Donald. Boy, when we heard his voice, were we ever excited. And we started, Daddy, help, help. He said, where are you? We said, we're over here. He said, where's over here? We said, we're at Buddy Sisco's in the well house. And he was talking to us, and we were calling to him, and we could hear him getting closer and closer and closer. And then all of a sudden, we heard the door opening, and he opened that door, and the sunlight came streaming in. And we were so glad to see our daddy. And he reached down into that well house, and he got me by one arm, and he got Donald by one arm, and he just picked us both up right out of that well house. And we thought, whoa, he's so strong to pick us up and set us out like that. And he said, what in the world are you boys doing in this well house? And I said, Buddy Sisco put us in here. And he said, well, what are you doing at Buddy Sisco's house? And then we thought, and Donald said, Nicky said it was okay to come over here. And my dad looked at me and said, Nicky Charles Harris, what in the world do you mean coming over here? You know I've told you not to come over here. You disobeyed me. He said, when I get you home, I'm going to give you a paddling. But he said, first, I need to go see Buddy Sisco. So he walked over to Buddy Sisco's door, and he knocked on the door. At first, nobody came to the door, but he knocked louder, and he said, Buddy Sisco, you better come out here right now. So in a minute, the door opened, and a trembling Buddy Sisco stood there looking at my dad, and he said, yes, sir, Mr. Harris? And my dad reached and grabbed Buddy Sisco by the shirt and just jerked him out the door and held him up off the floor. I mean, his feet were dangling. And my dad said, Buddy Sisco, let me tell you something. If you ever touch my boys again, I'll hit you so hard you'll hum like a 10-penny finishing nail hit with a greasy ball-peen hammer. I had no idea what that meant, but it sounded mighty tough. And Buddy Sisco said, yes, sir, Mr. Harris, I won't ever bother your boys again. And he didn't bother us again. Now, there is something he did later. I'll tell you in another story. But we got home, and my dad did give me a spanking. But I learned that day that when your mom and your dad tell you don't do something, they're not wanting to take any fun away from you. They're just wanting to protect you. And so I learned that day how important it is to obey. And the Bible says that to obey is better than even offering a sacrifice. And that's the way I learned that lesson.